Let me say first off that the fact that Derek Carr's brother David was once a huge all-time draft bust and a former #1 overall pick for the Houston Texans in 2002 in no way, shape, or form influences my view of Derek Carr as a prospect. I'm sure there are some other scouts and some other draft heads that can't necessarily say the same thing. But I am evaluating Derek Carr solely off of Derek Carr and nothing to do with family, anything like that at all. When I look at Derek Carr, I look at a guy that does bring some strengths and some very big positives to the table. And on the flip side, he has ways to go. He brings some quite striking and startling negatives to the table as well. In terms of the positives, he's got a real deal NFL arm. It's not elite arm strength, but he has more than enough arm strength to make every single NFL throw and be able to make those throws comfortably. He could fit balls into tight windows and short and intermediate throws, and he could stretch the field vertically in the deep passing game, looking like he can throw 50 to 60 yards comfortably on a consistent basis. You can't coach that type of arm strength usually. Either a guy has it or he doesn't. And Derek Carr does have it. He also demonstrates some really good accuracy at times in the short and intermediate passing game. Yeah, the system he played in at Fresno State threw a lot of screens and a lot of short passes. That is true. But he did generally tend to demonstrate some good accuracy on those throws. I think he's a little bit more mobile than maybe he showed at Fresno State. He's maybe a little bit of a better natural athlete than we might assume and what we might look at. And maybe, yes, he will need to show that more in the NFL. I don't doubt that. But there are times where he looks like a nice, fluid athlete who could occasionally pick up some yards on the ground with his feet and is able to extend plays with his feet, rolling out to the right and the left, being a threat to either throw the ball still or run with the football. He seems to be a relatively durable individual. And, 6'2.5", about 215 pounds. He's pretty well put together. So you would assume that injuries won't necessarily be a huge concern for him in his NFL career, I guess, although ultimately you never really quite know. Now, in terms of some of the negatives, some of the areas that he's going to have to work on, we talk about his accuracy. Yes, you could sit there and talk about the fact that, he has good accuracy in the short and intermediate areas, but that was not all that incredibly difficult to demonstrate. And even at times, his ball placement was still bad. When he needed to lead somebody, he threw it over their head or he threw it behind them. His intermediate and deeper accuracy in particular, I feel like suffered and struggled. Once he had to throw over 10 yards, you saw a lot of balls that were going over receivers' heads, balls that were behind receivers. His accuracy as a general rule just tended to struggle. I really think his mechanics need a lot of work. His release seems to be kind of simple and it seems to be effective, but he uses almost none of his lower body in his throwing motion. And again, it's one of these things that I talk about, that right there, the inability to use your entire body in the throwing motion can ultimately affect both your velocity on your ball and your accuracy as well. And there are times where you could definitely see that from Derek Carr. It's something he's going to need to work on. Another thing also, too, is that his arm angle, I think, at times is relatively inconsistent. There are times when his feet are set, and the rare time he actually does step into a throw, he actually seems to stay on top of the ball. But there are times where it seems like his arm angle comes way down to the point where he's almost throwing it sidearm, which could lead to an increased amount of tip passes by defensive linemen at the NFL level. So his mechanics, I feel like, need a lot of work. His pocket presence is not exactly the best either. There are times where he did demonstrate an understanding and a willingness and ability to be able to step up in the pocket. But I think at times he kind of shriveled up in the face of a pass rush. It froze him a little bit. And he also at times didn't really demonstrate much of an understanding of when he needed to move left or right in the pocket or escape the pocket altogether to be able to extend the play. A lot of times it seemed like when he did roll out or when he did run, it was mostly design stuff. It didn't come naturally. He didn't have that presence to understand, hey, this is how I have to extend the play and the way I go. So I think his pocket presence, it's something he's going to have to work on. His field vision. A lot of short dink and dunk screen passes and short and intermediate passes in that Fresno State system means that he threw a lot to the first read. He has a tendency to lock onto his target and stay locked onto his target, to not go through his downfield progressions. The occasional times that I would see him go through his progressions, it was one primary read and then it was the back as a check down option. And you know what? In the NFL, sometimes that is what it's going to be. At least he's not afraid to check down to that running back or that fullback out of the backfield. However, there's also going to be times where just because they take away your primary target, you can't sit there and stop looking down the field. You have to go through your reads and you have to go through your progressions. And that's something that Carr really didn't do a whole lot of, and he seemed to really struggle with at times at the NFL level or at the college level. So obviously it's going to be a big concern for him heading into the NFL level. He's going to need to work on his accuracy, as I mentioned. When I look at Derek Carr, I do not view him as one of the top 3 or 4 quarterbacks in this draft. I do not. I think he's got a ways to go in his game. There are elements to his game that I do like. Like I said, he has an arm that you just can't coach. He has some athleticism that you could work with, that you can improve on to make him even more of kind of a dual threat weapon. He's kind of one of those guys that it seems like when he's on, and when he's not, he's really not. Excuse me. It seems like when things are going well, he's a smooth operator and he could be just about as good as anybody that's in this 2014 NFL Draft class at quarterback. But when there's pressure in his face or the pressure is on at times, it seems like he shrivels up a little bit and he doesn't rise to the occasion, so to speak. I look at him and I say, this is a guy that seems to be a good leader. He seems to have a good head on his shoulders. He's a guy that you probably would want involved in your organization, which is going to help him come draft time because teams are going to look at that and they're going to be like, this could be a good young leader of men. And this is a guy we want to build a franchise around, and this is a guy we want in our locker room. So that's going to help. I look at him. I gave him a total grade in my scouting scoring system, if you will, and that's in the description box down below, by the way. I gave him a score of 65. So that's from physical tools only, the things that I can clearly, truly measure just by watching all of his game footage. So that ranks him behind Bortles and behind Bridgewater, just a tad bit above Manziel, which is a bit deceiving in and of itself because Manziel being 5'11", he got knocked big time for the size, and then with his size, a little bit for durability and stuff like that. So if I looked at Derek Carr right now, I view him as a second-round pick. I think if somebody reaches for him in the top 10, they're making a big mistake. Don't Christian ponder yourselves. He's a guy that if you take in the second round, he could end up being like Chad Henne, or he could end up being like, who knows, maybe an Andy Dalton, who is what I compare him to. A guy that when things are going well, he has those moments where he looks like a world beater and he looks really damn good. He looks like a franchise quarterback. But then when things aren't going well, he looks terrible and he looks like he should be benched. And so I think the second round, early portion of the second round, is where Derek Carr's draft stock is. That's where I feel like it's good value to draft him. A team like maybe a Jacksonville or a Tampa Bay or a Minnesota, if they pass on a quarterback in the first round, he's maybe somebody they could look at in the second round. It would also maybe be advisable because of the current salary cap structure of the NFL to be able to get an extra year guaranteed of having that quarterback for a team in the beginning portions of that second round to trade back up into the first round, the bottom portion of, to be able to take Derek Carr. To me, like I said, he's not one of the 3 best quarterbacks in this draft by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, I don't even think he's the 4th best. Do I think that he's somebody in the second round that is worth taking a gamble on, especially if you're in a team in need of a young quarterback and maybe you felt there was a better player available in round 1? Yeah, absolutely. I think, Derek Carr could potentially, in 3 or 4 years, have established himself as one of the better quarterbacks in this, what is actually a pretty deep quarterback class this year. But I don't envision him ever really stepping out of the shadows and being the best quarterback out of his draft class. I really don't.